Okay, it's 1 o'clock, folks, according to my time here. So I'd just like to welcome everybody to the Natural Environment Committee. I'd especially like to welcome my co-chair back from his overseas trip and acknowledge the gold medals that he's got in his hand there, which congratulations to you and your team there, Craig. Excellent work, probably worth going for. So that's very, very good. Look, this is our 8th Natural Environment Committee meeting, and as we're running a hybrid meeting due to COVID-19 alert level restrictions, this means there is no public gallery. Therefore, for those members of the committee who are online, we'll take your silence as agreement for any resolutions, and if you just use your hands up if you have a query or question when we come to a discussion, that would be much appreciated. Or put your hand up if you're a no for a resolution, but I'll make that clear at the time. I just have been informed that there's a quorum present and I am pleased to declare the meeting open. Just like to note that there has been a change of the order of business. And the report items today will be 8.1, 8.2, then we will go to the decision item 8.9, followed then back to 8.3 through to 8.8. I'll now pass to Councillor Pauling to open the meeting with a mihi whakatau, followed by a karakia from Councillor Marshall.
Tēnei te ruru te kaukau mai nei ki hai mā whiti ki hai mā rakaraka tūpoko nui o te ruru te reko he pō, he ao kawatia a tihei Mauriora. Te mihi tuatahi, mihi ki nā atua kaha rawa, a ho mai o kaha, ho mai o arawa kia mātou e tēnei wai nā wā katohaki, ko raki etu iho nei ko papatu tuanaku e takato, ko tānei kiuta, ko takaro ki tai, a tēnei nā mihi nā atua. A ka huri au taku whakaro ki nā tini aitua, a kuwehi atu ki te pō, ai tēnei marama, ai, ka huri au ki te kaimahi o tēnei kaurihera, ko Ross Vesey, moi mai rā te rangatira, hoia tō waka Whakamutunga ki te taho o tō tūpuna, ai kia koutou tō whānau pani, te Kinimati, ka nui te mihi aroha kia koutou, ai tēnei wā pauri, ai, kāti. Huri au ki nā hoa, tēnā koe Claire mo tō mahi, hei tautoko tēnei komiti, ai, tēnei tini kia koe, kia koutou katoa nā tautoko hoki kia au, tō taku haringa ki Ingarangi, tēnā koutou. Kia koutou nā kaimahi, tō mahi ringaraupa, tēnā koutou, ki nā mimo te hāpore, e mātakitaki i tēnei hui, te rorohiko, ai, ka nui te mihi kia koutou i tēnei wā, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou ka huri au te rākau kia Councillor Marshall, kia ora.
Kia ora. Whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga. Kia mā kina ki uta, kia mā taratara ki tai. E hi aki ana te atakura, he tio, he huka, he hohu, tihei Mauriora.
Your Councillor Pauling and Councillor Marshall for that. We'll now move on to agenda item number 2, which is the apologies. We have received apologies from Chair Huey for absence and Councillor Apanui, and we have an apology for lateness from Councillor Southworth. There's no other apologies that anybody's aware of? No, it shouldn't be. Okay, so we'll move on to the conflicts of interest. Are there any conflicts of interest to the item on today's agenda that people want to bring to our attention? There not being, we will then move on to agenda item 4, which is a public forum, deputations and petitions, and we have no public forum sessions today. Agenda item is the extraordinary and urgent business. Is there any extraordinary and urgent business to be brought to the table? There not being, thank you very much. We'll then move on to notices of motion, agenda item 6. We've received no notices of motion. And I'm not expecting any from the floor at such short notice. So unless somebody's got anything, thank you. Agenda item 7, we're moving right on to the minutes. We have item 7.1, which is the unconfirmed minutes from the Natural Environment Committee, 29th of June 2020. Do we have any matters of accuracy that people wish to raise there? So that's page 10 of your agenda. Okay, so we've got a mover. Who was that? Lan, and a seconder. Seconder, thank you, Councillor Reid. We've got Councillor Farm, Councillor Reid, moving seconder. All those in favour, say aye. Against? Right, it's carried. Thank you very much for that. Agenda item 7.2 is on page 35 of your agenda. These are the confirmed minutes of the Catchment Subcommittee meeting 10th of August. And we have a resolution here that the Natural Environment Committee receives those minutes from the Catchment Subcommittee meeting held on the 10th of August 22. We have a mover and a second for them, Councillor Mackenzie and Councillor Cranwell. Timatanga, Cranwell. All those in favour, say aye. Against? It was carried. Thank you. So we'll move on now to the report items, which are item 8. So that is page 69 of your agenda. 8.1. I'll ask Dr. Tim Davey, our Director of Science, to introduce this paper, please, Tim.
Kia ora, Chair. This is the standing item showing the resolutions from previous meetings, and I'm very pleased to say that all the resolutions have been completed. Nothing further to add.
Does anybody have any questions of clarification on this agenda item around the resolutions report? Nope, there is none there. So can we have them? Yep, thank you. We've got the recommendation up in front of us here that the Natural Environment Committee notes the status of the previous resolutions provided in the status of the Natural Environment Committee resolutions report, August 2022. Do I have a mover? Thank you, Councillor Scott, and a seconder, Councillor Marshall. Is there any discussion, or are we taking that as read? Happy with that? Thank you. All those in favour say aye. Against? Nobody against, so that's got that carried. Thank you very much. We'll now move on to agenda item 8.2, so that's page 72 of your agenda pack. I'd like Murray Griffin, who's the team leader of CWMS facilitation, and to come to the table. Now I understand you're going to be supported with Councillor Marshall and Councillor Sunkel on this as well. So Murray, I'll hand over to you to speak first, and then we'll move to the respective councillors for those zone committees. So, floor is yours.
Kia ora koutou. Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you, delighted to present this report to NEC today. This is as you're well aware, I suspect that the last of the triennial reports, as we've named them, that began in February with the central zones, the 3 committees in that central zone as we've defined it. So today's is following on from the previous NEC meeting where we had Ashburton and Ōtūwharekai presented, and this is the Waitaki lower and upper that are presented in this report. So with or in keeping with the reporting we've done for the previous triennial reports, we've principally focused on the action plans and the action plan budget and the projects supported through that in the 21-22 financial year. So the report endeavours to give an overview of what the committees have supported and worked through over the year in terms of that first tranche of projects utilising the action plan budget. And I guess the other thing quickly to note too, we would have liked to have had the chairs here today. Michael McMillan, who's the chair of the Lower Waitaki South Coastal Canterbury Committee, couldn't be here today, and Simon Cameron, who's been a long-standing member of Upper Waitaki, actually stepped down from the committee on Friday at their meeting. So Simon's handing the reins over to someone else, which will be confirmed in the coming months. The other thing to note, I've got my colleague within facilitation, Dave Moore, online to assist with any questions there may be. And sadly, we don't have Janine Rue, who is the Upper Waitaki facilitator, because she began her maternity leave today. So she's perhaps moved on to a slightly more important job, at least for the next year or so. So we've got Dave and I here as well in support of Councillor Sunkel and Marshall. So I can perhaps take the report as read and leave it open to councillors and any questions with regards to the report.
So maybe if you just sit there until we've had
Yeah, I'll leave the items there as read. Just want to really acknowledge the Lower Waitaki Zone Committee. We've had huge turnover on our committee. We've only got 2 community reps who were there when I started. So all the rest are new, and that's really exciting to have so many new people on the committee. I really want to acknowledge Dave for what he's done to pull the committee together through COVID. Last week we had a field trip to check out Whiria Te Waitaki. It's a Terunanga o Moiraki Jobs for Nature. It's been bringing Terunanga back to Moiraki and working on restoring and rejuvenating the areas around the Waitaki River, and it was really cool to talk to the team and the people who have come back to Moiraki and what their experiences are. There was a guy who was just out of school who'd come back, and there's a guy who'd come back from Australia and so that was really cool to see that the funding that we'd given to the Terunanga had gone towards, really empowering that community, along with some really awesome work along the Waitaki River berm. And next month we're having a final committee meeting at the Waiho Marae, which is a really exciting way to finish the council term. It's been great to have new blood in there, and there's some real enthusiasm to get on and do stuff, join up with the community. We're liaising with the high school as well, which is really exciting for everyone.
right, Councillor Circle.
Thank you, and I guess my first point is to acknowledge the work of Simon Cameron as chair of the Upper Waitaki Committee over a significant period of time, and the work, the effort and the passion that he has put into not just the committee but that community and the roles that he has taken. So I guess he has signalled for some time that he would like to step aside, and I guess it's finally happened, but he really has led that committee over time, and I suspect that will be duly acknowledged. And as with the Lower Waitaki, we have had a number of new members appointed to that committee, which again will reinvigorate. We have been a committee that's reasonably stable in numbers, and so having that new blood filling the table up with some enthusiasm over and above what is already there will be exciting. I note the action plan, and I think Lan has some questions. The soil moisturing project is really about the challenge that we have in that catchment of being a high phosphorus zone, the very narrow, I guess, opportunity or fine line between TLIs and nutrient inputs into the Ahuriri arm of the lake, and so better understanding what the challenges of farming and agriculture are, and how we can best mitigate those challenges. And then the other actions are really around, I guess, pest control, and the Cotoneaster is one of those pests that just takes over in the high country. So we think a lot about wilding pines and the magnificent work that goes on there, but Cotoneasters and alders and a whole bunch of other things really are impacting around those lakes as well. So that's that particular work. And then just very briefly on the action plan, looking to further gain, I guess, insights into the role of Maori and the cultural values that sit within that catchment. And I guess we can look at Te Waihora and we can talk at Waihao and a whole bunch of things where we kind of have an appreciation of what was there, or what was and what possibly should be, as opposed to somewhere like the Mackenzie country where there is no marae, there's no, I guess, permanent population, but as a trading route, as a food supply, all those kinds of things. So better understanding those connections and relationships within the Mackenzie, and with some enthusiasm with the folk that we have at the table. Continuing our Love of Lakes campaign, really concentrating on those lakes, given the role that tourism recreation has, and the effects that tourism and recreation has on those lakes, and the challenges that are, I guess, imposed by that. And that sort of rolls into further educating and empowering the community around that, and how we partner with the community. And one of the last parts is how do we get the best information we can, given those really narrow, I guess, challenges of a little bit of phosphate or a little bit of nitrate has a significant effect on the lake. So the reporting that we're asking from Environment Canterbury and others to inform the decision making. And as we all know, we have a bunch of farms with consent conditions, particularly up the Omarama, the valley and the likes in there, that are required to pull back on what they do if phosphate levels or TLIs hit. So there's a portion of the community that probably gets hit harder than some other parts. So it's understanding the complexity within their catchment. So exciting place to be part of. Some real challenges, slightly different to other catchments, but equally as important or possibly more important. And to Lance's questions, I'll let the officers answer that one.
Lan hasn't put a question yet, so we're asking for points of clarification at this stage. Then we can move the motion and then open up for discussion. So if you've got points of clarification initially, that would be much appreciated. Thank you, Lan. Councillor.
Yeah, thank you so much for this update. Yeah, really, really good stuff. Yeah, my question was just a little bit more about the Omarama soil moisture monitoring pilot project, because it sounds like it's looking at irrigation generally, but then it talks about nutrient loss as well. So is it kind of like the application of nutrients and their relationship to how you use irrigation, and is it across a number of farms, or is it just one farm, or what's the extent of it? Because it sounds, yeah, really helpful.
Dave.
Hi, thank you, Councillor. My understanding of the project is there's 7 farms that it's across, and all of those farms have already invested in soil moisture monitoring technology. And this project is to, I guess, standardise or look at what each of those farms are doing, and assessing them and getting some sort of coordinated approach and reviewing how they're doing it. And the idea is around, yes, water quantity, I guess, not wasting water, but not putting too much in and causing leaching because of too much water. So that's my understanding. So it's very much a study. How can we do this? How can we really make it work? And then the learnings from that could be rolled out to other places as well.
Well, thank you, Dave.
Are there any other points of clarification? Lan?
Sorry, I have another one on Lower Waitaki. Yeah. It was just about the Know Your Catchment platform, and thanks so much for that update as well, Nicole. And again, it sounds like there's great work going on. And it was just about the Know Your Catchment platform, and it sounds like it's a really good initiative, initially by Irrigation New Zealand, but now it's the Waitaki Irrigators Collective. I'm just wondering if there's conversation at the Zone Committee in relation to this project, because it talks about stories of interest and that kind of thing in the catchment. And just from working in the area myself, I know there's a number of really endangered native fish, for example, the lone longjaw galaxid and big nose galaxid and Canterbury mudfish and that kind of thing. But I couldn't find anything on the Know Your Catchment that references freshwater fish, and I just wondered if that's part of something that they might go into, or whether the Zone Committee could encourage them to incorporate that, because it seems like that's what kind of makes it come alive, people knowing what creatures are there. And is there any discussion about that?
Kia ora. So at the moment it's just reporting monitoring data. Fish monitoring hasn't really happened yet, other than those one-off surveys that do happen. It's absolutely a conversation that we can have with the Waitaki Irrigators Collectors. There's a number of people on the Zone Committee who are affiliated with them, so that's absolutely something we could approach, but it's not something that's happening at the moment.
Thank you.
Councillor Scott.
Just to note also that the chair, myself and C have a meeting with that collective next week, so we could raise that.
Perhaps so then.
We could possibly raise it then. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Is there any more points of clarity around this paper? If there isn't, I'll ask speakers. Murray, you can leave the table now. Thank you very, very much. Perhaps just as you leave, I'd like to also express on behalf of the council the thanks to those chairs, Michael, and obviously Simon, as John says, has been there a long time for the work. So if that can be passed on, that'd be much appreciated. Thank you.
I said at the time, I also acknowledge Bruce Murphy, who was replaced as chair earlier this year and had been there for a while.
I just wonder if we couldn't make a note and just a note of thanks to those chairs. Thank you.
Thank you, we'll do that. So we'll now put the motion, which is up here. Yes, start it quick. That the Natural Environment Committee receives this update on the Upper Waitaki and the Lower Waitaki South Coastal Canterbury CWMS Water Zone Committees and the current priorities and progress in advancing the action plans and budgets. So I'll have a mover and a seconder. Councillor Marshall, seconder. Councillor Scott, thank you very much. So we've got Councillor Marshall, Councillor Scott. Right, now, is there any further discussion that people or comments that people would like to make? Councillor? Okay. Thank you. Is there any further discussion? Is that your hand up, Councillor Scott?
It is, Chair. Chair, I'd like to note something here while we're talking about these two zone committees, and the fact that we had John Wilkie passed away some years ago, and we were always going to do something to acknowledge the work that John had done on the Waitaki River, specifically around the longfin and the trap and release stuff that he was doing on the Waitaki, and noting that we've never got around to doing it. And Lan and I worked with John, didn't we, Lan, early on in the CWMS process on longfin. Excuse me, and you, Claire, too. You, sorry about that. It's my memory going again, Claire. But I just don't. I think that he was pretty unsung. He was never on the front foot, one to blow his own trumpet. And I think that the sticking point was that his family were unsure of, what we might or could do. So I just wonder if we can just let that hang over till the next term. But I would really like us to do something, because he did do a lot of really good work with both these zone committees. Thank you.
So are you suggesting that we investigate how we might acknowledge the great work that he has done on that river, because he certainly did for many, many, many years.
Suggesting that we hold on to that and that we should invest that thought in Tim, who will be here. We know he'll be here in October, November, unless he's out recruiting somewhere already. So I just think I don't want us to lose sight of it, Claire, and I'm sure that you'll support that.
Definitely, we'll note that, so that that's something that we don't lose sight of. Thank you, Councillor Scott. Is there any other discussion on that? Okay, if there isn't, no, nothing online. I will just, we've got a mover and a seconder here. We've got Councillor Marshall, Councillor Scott, and so all those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against? There be none, so it's carried. So thank you. We will now move on and take the agenda, the item that we've brought forward, which is agenda item 8.9. So that is page 194 on your agenda. Around the co-chairs of the Catchment Subcommittee report and a request for an overspend from the July 2022 flood event impacts. I will then ask co-chair of the Catchment Subcommittee, Timatanga, yay, incredible.
Kia ora, Chair. Can I ask Catherine and Lee to the table, please? Kia ora tātou. As you know, we had our Catchment Committee hui on the 10th of August, and in that Catchment Committee we had three recommendations, and one was passed, but two of those were to recommend to come to the Natural Environmental Committee, so it's a whole of council committee to make the decision. And you can see the two recommendations in the paper, and I'll just ask Lee to work through the paper.
Good afternoon. So this is specifically for out of scheme works. So council is well aware of the decision that you made for the annual plan to stand up an out of scheme approach, a goods and services budget to do physical works out of scheme. It's the first time we've had such a budget. It was supported by the flood affected mayors leading up to the draft annual plan, and has certainly been welcomed by the community on the ground where we've started works. So in July, or in the last 6 weeks, we've had 6 significant flood events. There's still water out in a number of places, even it's flowing out of the Ashburton and Rangatata again today. But in the out of scheme areas, the district councils have been very receptive to us, not only being able to go to out of scheme places and offer them advice, but also offer a practical solution. So the approach we've been taken with some of the works on the ground has been to partner with the money so far. So it's been a cost sharing arrangement. The one completed has been one on the Hawkins River, where we've cost shared with Sale District Council and NZTA to complete some works. There's been an increase in demand for this type of work given the amount of flooding we've had in the last month. So the $150,000, which stood up the concept of out of scheme, staff have realised we will spend that, and we will run out of that money before the end of the financial year. So we're requesting early so that we can be proactive of a potential overspend as the year progresses. I note we don't have a work program past the 150, and the wording is specifically up to, it's basically if it's required, it allows us to be more agile. So that's the decision before you today.
Thank you for that. I think it's probably best if, well, is there any points of clarification around the paper and the presentation at this stage? Just remembering we will go into discussion. So points of clarification for either the co-chairs or Lee right at the moment. Councillor Marshall.
Just clarification that this is just in case budget that will be used as needed up to that value. It's not a guaranteed spend that we're approving.
Correct.
Councillor Southworth, question of clarification.
Yeah, thank you. So can I just clarify that what we're talking about here, there's been already 429,000, which is for professional advice. And then we've approved already 150,000 for on the ground out of scheme works. And that's now been allocated. Is that correct? And that we're now talking about another 150k to come from somewhere for further on the ground work if and when it subsequently projects arise. So is that correct? Am I understanding those facts correctly?
The advisory budget is 429,000, so that's for advice out of scheme. To date, we've only spent about 15,000 in the bank of the budget, but conversations on the ground with 7 sites, we've committed about half the money. So we've indicatively earmarked about $75,000 of the money. And I guess because it's August and that money was supposed to last all the way till June next year, we're indicating we will spend the 150 at some point. We're not actively out there looking for this work. It's more like a secondary service we offer the community. So if we get to the 150 in November or January or March, the request is to then overspend if needed, noting that we're not actively going out looking to do things. It's more a conversation and partnership with TAs as more flood events and issues arise.
So can I a supplementary to that? So what was it now? Sorry, it's gone out of my head. On the ground, 150. We've spent 15, 75k more in the pipeline, and then 150 if it comes on. I know. So the process then, what's the process? So if projects come along that are to be funded, will that come back to council so we have oversight, or is that just you'll just get on and spend it and councillors are not involved in that part of the decision making? Thank you.
Currently, this budget is overseen by our principal engineer, David Ayres. The proposal was that in conversation with myself, our staff make the decisions of what work could or should go ahead. And the proposal is it does not come back to council.
And so one final one, sorry, these are just coming as I'm hearing the answers. In terms of, so you've mentioned before that there's some match funding or there's funding that's coming in from other sources. So there's a good opportunity to leverage some outcomes beyond what our dollar on its own would give. And is it the expectation, is there some policy around that? Is there an expectation that that would be the types of projects that you would look to fund with this in the, you know, if they should they arise? Or is there potential that we would look to actually put the bill for 100% on a project and, you know, yeah.
So we've started to put, I guess, some internal draft policy around this, since it is a new program of work in a sense for staff. So the internal section policy is to partner wherever possible. So our approach has been with, we're talking to Waimakariri about a couple of sites at the moment, and it's very quickly, it's either we will do this if you match it, or if the landowner also puts in a third. So that's the approach that I guess staff have chosen to take to make the budget stretch further. There may be occasions for a $5,000 job or something for whatever reason that ECan does pay 100% of it, but the approach we are taking is let's try and partner first to make the money funding stretch further, noting that we don't have to do anything out of scheme. It's just it's a good thing to do for the community to resolve these issues post flood.
Okay, we've got a couple of other comments around the clarity before we put the motion and go to discussion. So
Kia ora, Lee. We've got 2 recommendations on the table, so to speak. The one you've talked about, and then we have the one regarding the councils. What does recommendation 1 help support recommendation 2 in a sense, working with the councils? Yeah.
They are connected in a way. What's my answer? They're separate but connected, in that being able to spend money in the upper Selwyn to help resolve some of Selwyn's upper out of scheme issues has been a bit of a stepping stone approach while we do work on that longer term all of catchment approach. So it has, I guess, smoothed the waters in terms of being able to proactively do something while we wait for those rating options to be put in front of council for the LTP.
Councillor Finkel.
Thank you. How much of these works involve, I guess, our ability to utilise our global consents for some of these works versus a TA or someone else having to go through a process to get a job done, whereas partnering with us with a bit of money and our global consent achieving, I guess, outcomes for the community?
So we have a code of practice and a permitted activity rule that allows us to work anywhere in the region, and the parts that doesn't cover, we hold resource consents for. So we can, if we wish to, work in any waterway within Canterbury. So if we are leading the jobs, the TA, if they are leading them, can apply for certification under the code of practice and carry out that work that way. But if we are leading the job, then separate permissions aren't required. Noting we do go through very thorough partner and stakeholder consultation and environmental checks before we put any machinery on the ground.
This is just, I guess, it's an advantage if we are co-joined in some of these works, not just the money aspect.
Yes, correct.
Yeah, I think probably at this point, is this a question of clarification, Councillor Mackenzie, Elizabeth?
Yes.
There you go.
Oh, sorry. Hi, Lee. Yeah. I guess my question is sort of around, I guess, the approach or prioritization around how this is spent. And I wonder, in terms of actually goes more to the policy side. Do we have a policy around how we prioritize in terms of making sure that we have a resilience or sustainable approach to the flood protection that's being put in place? Have we developed that policy that goes with this work yet?
I'm just trying to join a couple of things here. So the overall approach or policy will be collected within the 200-year river strategy for the whole of the holistic river management for Canterbury. For out of scheme works, it's just been reactionary so far in terms of what's happened post flood. We're having conversations with Mackenzie and Selwyn and Christchurch City and Waimakariri around various issues that have popped up that are sort of in the grey. They sit between the two councils, but we can fix them together. So we haven't advertised this approach, and we don't have any dedicated staff to it. It's sort of as we can fit it in. We haven't been building any structures or anything. It's purely been clearing debris or gravel, that type of works in terms of clearing out streams. So we don't have a written policy around it. I think that's
that was my concern, because the act of clearing debris or clearing things out is actually an approach which is now being questioned. So I just wonder if perhaps some thought could be given to whether the long-term plan, the 200-year plan, should also apply to the out of scheme areas.
It will. That 200-year plan will apply right across Canterbury, whether it's in scheme or not.
Thank you.
Okay, I think at this point in time, I'll put the recommendations up. Here we are on board. That the Natural Environment Committee, 1, recommends to the Council that Council approves an overspend by up to $150,000 in a general rate funded out of scheme goods and services budget to support the July 2022 flood events. And number 2, recommends to the council that staff work with Waimakariri, Selwyn and other district councils to consider alternative river rating options, such as a whole of catchment, for the consideration as part of the 2024-2034 long-term plan. Do I have a mover? Timatanga Cranwell, seconder Councillor McKenzie, sorry. So we'll now move to discussion on this point. We've got Councillor Scott's got his hand up straight away, and then Councillor Edge.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Look, I guess the risk around this is that La Nina will get stuck and it will never change. And so we're in a pattern that's just going to keep repeating. And the risk is that, you know, we're going to have to do more and more of this stuff. In fact, that only 2,000 of our 78,000 kilometres worth of rivers and drains are rated. This piece of work was brought to us and fully supported by the Mayors of Canterbury at a forum that we had in Selwyn, because of the absolute the loss of any direction at all from anyone that's on an unrated river. You know, how do we get that advice to them? And to me, this is one of the more significant things that this council has done, is to allow this work to be done. I went to a meeting in Amarama on Saturday, and the chair pointed out that I was in the room, which, good on the chair, someone from ECan here. They've had about $1 million worth of damage done to the motor camp where the Amarama stream came out and carved through it, and has left a pretty much a trail of devastation through there. And the young lady who was her first business venture was just distraught. And she came up to me and she said, you know, what am I going to do about this? And fortunately, I'd had a discussion with Lee during the week and said, look, I'm going to this meeting, this is there. And Lee said, look, we know about this. We are going to take this under consideration, and I will have some people there next week. And I got a text from this young woman on Tuesday morning saying, thank you very much for the assistance that you've given us in doing this, because that's put my mind at ease, because she didn't know where she was going to go with this stuff. And I'm not too sure where you got to on the dollars, but I think you're probably strong-arming Waitaki District Council, because, you know, it's part of what they're doing. And to me, this is what we should be doing. You know, during the flooding in 2021, Ian and I went around the communities, and I had a fellow in Orari, and I could give him nothing. Couldn't say anything to him at all. Then Stephanie and Lee got the heads together, and Shawnee became sort of resource to do that thing. It's the best thing that's ever happened. Now, my issue with this is yours. Is that, you know, is this finance out of control? I don't know. But in this point in time, this is a good thing. And we probably need to have really good in-depth discussion with our mayors about how we follow this stuff through for the future, because they're tuned into this. We don't want to be the ones standing out alone on this, doing this. But this is a good piece. So I support this fully, Chair.
We've got Councillor Edge, then Councillor Elizabeth McKenzie.
Thanks, Chair. I just want to consider those as two separate motions or recommendations. The first recommendation at the Catchment Subcommittee, I voted against that particular recommendation. And I did so because, as Councillor Scott's referred to, that this out of scheme stuff is likely to keep continuing. There has been no additional money set aside for regular events, stormwater events that are causing huge damage across our river environments, and it could happen again in a few weeks' time, and more and more money is being put into it. And that impacts on our rates, which also we know causes problems with our community. I mean, over the last 3 years, the cost to our community is probably in the order of $80 million, including standard maintenance costs to repair and recover from our storm events. And these out of scheme events just add to that burden. But I can absolutely acknowledge the distress that it causes people who are not in the scheme, where the rivers break out and cause immense damage. And I did support the use of, in our annual plan, the use of some funding for our scheme projects. So I completely understand that. But it comes a point when we actually have to get on with developing at speed the 200-year transition plans that we've been talking about, whole of catchment planning, with some urgency. And we do need to do that, I believe, in the next long-term plan. So when it comes to voting, I'll have to have my vote against that particular resolution recorded, and that's in line with the minutes that we addressed earlier. In terms of the second recommendation, I mooted that at the time and thoroughly think that this is a way forward in terms of really radically looking at alternative river rating options and addressing them in a whole of catchment way, which is required by the National Policy Statement on Fresh Water to bring about Te Mana Ōtūwharekai issues. So that's really important. And just as early as this week, Lee and I were attending the Waimakariri all-aboard meeting, where it was a discussion about flooding concerns in that region. And it was mentioned that there are options that will probably come and be discussed at the long-term plan discussion stage about how do we proceed in the future. But it is an urgent issue, but in principle, continuing to spend money that's unallocated is problematic.
Thank you. We'll now go to Councillor Elizabeth McKenzie.
Yeah, so like Councillor Edge, my concern is that, and I would like to vote separately, have those two parts of the motion separated out, is that this is more reactive spending. I mean, I can see, you know, there is an issue on the ground, people are being affected, but I don't yet see any sort of application of resilient, sustainable flood protection design being applied. I'm hearing more business as usual, treating rivers as drains that must be cleared. Scotland is light years ahead of us on this. They are remeandering their rivers, they're constructing ponds, they're constructing log jams, they're constructing wetlands. They don't need fish traps because they've got natural log barriers. We're not anywhere near that. And my concern is that we are going to continue to spend money in reaction to every event in this way. And so I do think we need to put a line in the sand and say, no, we need to start doing this a different way. I would just like to also note that Omarama Motor Camp, if you look on Google Maps, is right next to the Ahuriri River. It is right next to it. And so, you know, there is an issue of the location there. So yes, what I would definitely support the second part of this motion. I will be voting against the first part. Thank you.
Councillor Southworth, and then Councillor Sunkel, and then Councillor McKenzie. Ian.
Thank you. I do support the 150,000 in this case, but my concern is around the understanding what policies are, which I hear are not fully developed, they're in development. And I would like to know that councillors will be able to have oversight of that and be involved in that, not least because it seems clear to me that there is actually going to need to be more funding. This is sort of like sticking plaster stuff at the moment. And I acknowledge that the team asked for $1 million and then we cut right back. So I would really like to see this as acknowledging that we've, you know, the rubber's hitting the road. There's no doubt about it. We know we need to do things differently, but we're in transition. So to keep people safe and for the sort of mental health issues and all the other things that go with flooding and that anxiety, I think this is the right thing to do to spend this. And I'm hearing that there's match funding and so on, so our dollar's going further, but we can't just keep doing this. So I would really like to know that we'll have a report come back, maybe it's in 6 months' time, outlining what policy development has landed on, what how much has been spent, what projects have been spent on, what the decision making was, or maybe councillors could be incorporated into the decision making, or at least kept abreast of it. So we can really take the lessons in this smaller scale stuff and then assess what next. And this is very much in the context that I'm also hearing we are going to have this 200 or 100 or whatever we land on long vision plan for working much more holistically with our rivers, recognising the enormous threats that they pose when they're in flood, and that we, instead of trying to control that power and energy that's only going to get bigger and bigger with climate change, that we're really going to recognise these risks and adapt and take that on board. So for now, I do support this, but I would really love to know that council's going to have that extra information, and it's really clearly leads into a more less ad hoc piecemeal mechanism come the next annual plan, and then a full review of some description come the long-term plan. So we're not just chasing our tail all the time. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Southworth. I imagine this is very much a part of the work for the Sub-Catchment Committee to be appraised of this sort of project work and be kept up to date with what's actually happening there. So unless I'm completely wrong, and people gave me a nod here before, so should be right there. I'll go to Councillor Sunkel.
Thank you. I support both recommendations, and whether they're one or two put together or not. I see the first motion as a means of achieving what we want to achieve in the interim as we move towards the second recommendation of looking at those catchments as a whole. And it's easy to say they don't sit within a targeted rating district or they're out of scheme. We have significant communities that have been impacted by what has been, I think, one of the wettest year on record. And so we genuinely face challenges in our communities that we haven't faced for a long time. And I accept that into the future we may well face similar challenges, but if we can put in place the second part of the recommendation, then we're well on the way to being able to work through those challenges. If I have my civil defence or my emergency hat on, I would have great difficulty sitting here and saying we've spent 150,000. Yes, the world's fallen over, but we're not going to spend any more because we've spent our 150,000. We are in a space of exceptional circumstance. Yes, it may continue. Yes, we need policy. Yes, we need to look at how we will do it in the future. But the immediacy of what we have, I think, requires us in good faith with our communities to fund the works out of scheme and work as fast as we can to bring catchment rating and those processes and systems into place. So I support both recommendations.
Councillor Mackenzie.
Thanks, Madam Chair. If I could just perhaps not answer, but reassure Vicky in her comments about the future planning, and that is that certainly in terms of the second recommendation here, I think that the Catchment Committee and I, as one of the chairs, and Jan and I are talking to our staff about how we can fund perhaps in this coming annual plan the resource to make sure that our Rivers team are resourced so that they can deliver on the second recommendation. So that's part of developing these plans. But look, in terms of the first recommendation, this is really important. And I think it's slightly ironic that Liz mentioned Scotland, because I happen to know Scotland really quite well, and I can assure you that almost every river and water body in Scotland is managed. And our problem in New Zealand is we don't manage our rivers to a sufficient level. And rivers, actually, where you have human habitation, especially where you have roads and bridges crossing rivers, we need to manage them. And that is not unique to the river rating scheme areas, because rivers do what they want to do, and they're not particularly constrained by whether it's a river rating scheme or outside a river rating scheme. And so in terms of jurisdiction, when people have problems with the river, whether it's a district council or whether it's a private landowner or the public in general, they tend to look to ECan, Environment Canterbury, as the agency who can fix that problem or give them some advice to that problem. If our answer is you're out of the river scheme, so we won't do anything, it is a significant reputational risk to the Environment Canterbury, and I think we need to think about that. And if we can, and Lee has very clearly enunciated that she's developing a policy and has a policy which is about trying to leverage any of this money that we might vote to her today to get the best bang for buck out of that by working with other with the TAs, NZTA, Whakakatahi, but potentially, and perhaps groups of landowners such as in Marama to actually leverage the our dollar spend to get the best outcome, then that is really good for our reputation. It's actually really good for outcomes. Now, one of the issues that, again, Councillor Sunkel has touched on is that we've had a series of issues. And it goes back to the floods of May last year where the damage to TA's infrastructure was in the multi-millions of dollars. Now, the ratepayers that pay for that damage are the same ratepayers that pay ECan. And so $1 saved by a TA is actually $1 saved by our ratepayers. So we need to think about that in context. So if by working with our TAs to fix some of this infrastructural damage where rivers cross roads and bridges, we can help them do a better job by working with them rather than just saying it's up to you. Especially when you've got floods we had 2 major floods last year, and we've had a series of floods again this year. The TAs are stretched, I can tell you that. You talk to Neil Brown, Sam Broughton, Dan Gordon, they'll tell you that their resources are stretched in trying to keep the rivers from destroying there on a perennial basis. And I happen to know that Buick Bridge is blown out on the way up to Lake Heron at the moment because the river has come out and has washed away its approaches. I happen to know that they've replaced the culvert across the Potts River at the top on the road to Erewhon 3 times in the last 2 weeks. The district council has, because they can't control the river, but they need to keep the road open for the people who live past that culvert. These things, it's one thing for private landowners to understand the risk of that. It's another when the TAs are then having to constantly fix this without any assistance from the regional council. So, look, I would urge you to put your reservations about this aside, vote this money. We will work as a catchment committee, well, may not be, well, we as ECan will work over the next 2 years to try to get a more rational approach to this going forward. But in the meantime, I think for our reputational risk, if no other reason, we need to vote in favour of this.
Thank you very much. Just before we hand to Timatanga to close it off, I just really want to share my views too. Look, I'm very supportive of the overspend up to 150,000, the request that we've got here today as a recommendation. But I have started from a point of where do we actually stop? Where will we draw a line? But what has taken me back to be fully supportive of this is the fact that the reputational risk, the relationships with our TAs and our communities, which Lee alluded to, and I think that is critically important, and Councillor Mackenzie's also alluded to that. And I think the other thing that was touched on by Councillor Scott and Councillor Sunkel was around the fact that this is the start of a process, and we need to have a bigger conversation about how we're actually going to rate our rivers across Canterbury at some stage in the very near future as a significant piece of work. So fully supportive of the recommendations. Triannual, last word.
I'm happy to be the mover and seconder for both, and then we do it separately. You happy with that, Ian? Yep. So I'm happy to do that. And then, as the question I asked Lee before, how recommendation 1 and 2 are kind of linked together, and we've heard the conversations about reputational risk, but also leveraging off the councils and how they working with 1 can actually help working further with 2. It's interim kind of areas. I hear the concerns about because look what's happening every week. There's a flood kind of some part of the country, and I really think whoever's in the catchment committee and the next triennium that they really have to work especially looking at that whole of Catchment and hearing Councillor Edge, you know, looking at SPS, MPS freshwater and that whole of Catchment and kind of changing those mindsets. And whoever's in there, that's what they're really going to have to focus on. And the other thing is also, I mean, in here I noticed that there's an annual hui with runanga, that it, you know, sometimes some of this work, it has to be quite dynamic, working with the runanga entities, and just kind of, you know, because some areas it could be wahi tapu and wahi taonga. So it's just making sure, you know, through this work as well that there's that relationship with the runanga. Kia ora.
Okay, thank you. I think that's had a pretty good, robust discussion there. Everybody's put their views on the line. So we've got a mover and seconder agreed to move both of those if we're doing them independently, which I've decided that we will do. So we'll move to the first recommendation there, that the Natural Environment Committee recommends to the council that council approves an overspend by up to 150,000 in general rate funded out of scheme goods of service budget to support the July 2022 flood event impacts. We've got mover and seconder. All those in favour? Against? Councillor Edge. Vicky, are you for or against? Can you just say, please?
Oh yeah, no, I have my hand up for.
So we've got Councillor Edge against. Do you? Okay.
Oh.
Where you go, Elizabeth?
Can I just say that I am going to vote in favour? I have listened to the other councillors and I've decided I will vote in favour. Thank you.
Yes, if you could record that I'm voting against the resolution. Thank you.
Okay, we'll then move on to the second resolution there. All those in favour say aye. Any against? No against, that's carried. Thank you very much for that.
I know it's a bit after the fact, and I probably should have asked it earlier, but I only occurred to me, I mean, for damage that might have been done this month, because I know there is some significant damage that's been done this month. Is that recommendation, do you think that limits you to only damage done in July 2022? No, thank you.
Thank you. We'll move on to agenda item 8.4, which is the update on Ōtūwharekai. I jumped forward. Sorry, I have. Apologies. Flicked my page over too quick. 8.3, thank you very much for bringing that to my attention. Biodiversity and Biosecurity Portfolio Progress and Future Briefings. Alex Morgan, our Team Leader of Strategy and Planning and Biodiversity and Biosecurity, is going to introduce this report. So Alex, you're on screen. It's over to you.
Thank you, Chair. I almost got away with one. Look, I'm going to take the bulk of this paper as read because it's quite lengthy one and it covers quite a lot of different aspects of our portfolio. But I'll just preface before we move into questions why it's come to you, noting that there is a lot to cover there, and we've tried a few different ways to get information into you as councillors and committee members about the progress of the biodiversity and biosecurity portfolio over the last year or so. So I guess take this as a continued work in progress and a commitment to keep working to get the right formula in terms of presenting portfolio information to you. We've sort of used this paper as an opportunity to summarise briefly the work that's gone on in each of the programs that sits within our portfolio, and specifically spotlight some of the work that's gone on. And we sort of took a bit of care to pick some things where you may not have heard much about it around the council table previously, to sort of indicate that, you know, there's a whole lot going on and you don't necessarily always get to hear every bit about what's happening in our portfolio, noting that council time and briefing slots are sort of quite hard to come by at times. Also tried to be quite clear about where the work we're undertaking is linked back to the long-term plan and the level of services that we're committed to delivering. just in terms of making sure that we as a portfolio continue to make progress in terms of delivering on council's strategic direction, and we can all understand how we're aligned with that broader set of community commitments. So I'll leave the introduction there, and I'm very happy to take some questions.
Okay, we've got question. Councillor Farm and then Councillor Edge.
Yeah, thanks so much for the paper and the update, Alex. My questions are more around just a number of projects or things that have been carried out under the different project areas, and just trying to find out a little bit more about each of those, because it's great that we're kind of being told that the work is done, but it's sort of like, well, what did we learn or what did we find from it? And I'm not sure if you'll be able to, each piece of work might be a whole suite of findings from it, but I was particularly interested in the on page 87, the analysis of the suitability of the existing land cover database information in terms of informing us about the state of our Indigenous vegetation, and also the look at whether we could implement sort of the tier 1 monitoring across Canterbury, and what that would mean for us as an organisation, and presumably in terms of sharing resources and methodologies with DOC, because they already do this kind of stuff. So any comment on that?
Yes, happy to answer those questions. I think with the land cover database work, it's probably slightly earlier days for what we might be able to glean from that. You'll note in the report we talk about the links to the terrestrial biodiversity indicators that are part of the regional sector report that had been prepared, and the land cover database we expect will be able to take us some way towards getting answers to some of those matters. But that's probably as far as that work's gone at the moment. The next steps for that are really for our science team to start interrogating what we've seen and fleshing it out into a science summary report that gives us a better indication of what exactly it's going to be able to tell us in terms of what we need to monitor. As for the other element there, the tier 1 monitoring, the work we did to date was primarily costing a bunch of different scenarios. So we looked at what it might mean to undertake the same level of intensity and on the same timescale as DOC for tier 1 monitoring using their exact same methodology across the region, as well as looking at multiple different phasing options. So what if you did less sites or less frequent evaluation at each of those sites? So we have some indicative costing for that forms part of our broader approach to designing and scoping, which is what you've got to remember we're doing here, scoping a regional biodiversity monitoring framework. And I think the thing I'd like to particularly get across is that because we're doing this scoping, we're evaluating a whole heap of different options and need to be able to come back to council with a really comprehensive sort of idea about what we're going to be able to deliver for different sort of price scales that allows us to meet whatever statutory responsibilities we have to deliver on a regional biodiversity monitoring framework. For example, what might the National Policy Statement for Indigenous Biodiversity require us to do? And we've seen the draft of that, giving us an indication of sort of the baseline of what we'll have to do, and what will that be able to tell us about the state and trend of Indigenous biodiversity across the region, or what might we be able to learn about sort of at a smaller scale the effectiveness of a particular policy or management intervention.
Cool, thank you. And then the final one in that same vein was also about the Greys wetland project, Greys Hills wetland, and our science team investigating research about the effect of fencing. And what did that find?
Yep. So we brought that work up in this paper primarily to show that with sort of some strategic alignment between the work that our science teams are doing and the work that's going on in our broader wetlands program. That being said, there is a publicly available report on some of that work, and I'm happy to provide a link to that perhaps either in the chat here or through the governance team afterwards, that gives a bit of a more technical answer than I can here about that work.
Thank you. And then my last question is just about Me Ururako and the future work, including the scoping of the next catchments. What are we thinking here? And I'm trying to recall specifically the implications of our annual plan decisions about the reduction in budget and what the implications for, but I can't remember off the top of my head. So would you be able to give us a bit of an update there?
Yeah, so you'll be aware that there's a bit less money than we might have expected this year to deliver some of the Me Ururako work based on the annual plan deliberations that occurred. I think council opted to continue on with the same amount of funding that ended up being allocated in year one, which is roughly $450,000, somewhere to that effect. What that means is that this year's work is primarily going to stay focused in delivering work on the existing priority catchment, which is around about the Waiauwha up in the Huranui. It includes parts of the Waiauwha, Mason, Leader and Lottery rivers and where they converge. So work this year will stay focused there, and will largely be focused on things like protection and regeneration this year rather than planting, given the costs that are associated with sort of bulk planting and the reduction in budget. There's also been a half-time coordinator to help with both the SCAR project and Me Ururako employed to help drive some of that work. And I think the crux of your question is really about, well, what next? And the other part of that work stream this year will be investigating, well, given what we know or understand to be the case about the financial allocation for next year, what catchments might we need to bring, or might be suitable for us to scale into in the central and southern zones. So our work is involving working with staff and people in the community and catchments to sort of get a feel for where that might be. And we don't have a shortlist just yet, but noting that we've got both ecological and community engagement criteria for delivery in those catchments, as well as considering what priorities Mana Whenua and the relevant Papatipu Rūnanga in whatever area we might end up working would be. So also trying to, I guess, make any decision about a shortlist that make sure that we're continuing to look at high value sites where there's alignment with our existing work programs or planned work where we can scale outcomes more effectively.
Thank you, Alex. We'll now go to Councillor Edge, and then we've got Clearwater and Southworth.
Thanks, Alex. I've just got a question regarding on page 86, items 8 and 9. I presume that sort of relates to the levels of service 13.1 and 13.2. And I was just really inquiring about where we are at the moment in terms of revitalising the Canterbury Biodiversity Strategy, and just wondered if Ngāi Tahu input had yet begun in terms of having a look at that regional biodiversity strategy.
Yeah, sure thing. So I guess we chose to focus on something that perhaps Council had heard less about in terms of the regional monitoring work when drawing a spotlight there. But you're right that the program there is designed to deliver on the level of service that relates to the Canterbury Biodiversity Strategy. You'll be aware, I've spoken to you a few times about us needing to have to sort of hit pause a little bit while we waited for some of the guidance that we expected in the National Policy Statement for Indigenous Biodiversity. And we've since seen that exposure draft, which gives us a bit more confidence about not just the mandatory content of that document, but what central government's expectations around engagement, partnership, and the role of Mana Whenua in delivering components of that strategy. So with that guidance, I think we're in a better position now to make some steps forward. We've been working internally to date with our two-year team to understand the priorities of Te Rūnanga and the Papatipu Rūnanga, and our next steps are to sort of formalise how that will work before expanding into the broader conversation with the rest of the biodiversity strategy signatories. We've also been sort of playing around in the background doing some analysis that's not yet complete about to what degree the current Canterbury Biodiversity Strategy already gives effect to the requirements that we've seen in the National Policy Statement for Indigenous Biodiversity, and a similar process for any alignment or changes that might be required or recommended from staff into the panel of people who will be responsible for the Canterbury Biodiversity Strategy about the links to Te Mana o Te Taia, the Aotearoa New Zealand Biodiversity Strategy.
Great, thank you very much for that update. Cheers.
Okay, Councillor Clearwater.
Thanks, Alex. Again, in relation to the land cover database information, I just wondered, in terms of the monitoring, are we able to have some focus too on the types of insects that would be already, say, beneficial for our Indigenous vegetation? Have we got some focus on that?
Well, that one I'll probably have to take on notice, Councillor Clearwater. Apologies. It's a bit deep into the technical detail in terms of what we've got there. There's definitely elements of the terrestrial framework that look at the specific fauna that exists within or how it's protected as part of monitoring. Some insects might also be captured by the NPS species lists that we've seen, but yeah, to give you a proper answer to that, I think I'd really need to go and talk to our monitoring experts and come back.
Well, thanks, Alex. Perhaps when we have time for some further discussion, that would be helpful. Thank you.
No worries.
Councillor Southworth.
Thank you. I was interested in, you've got paragraph 16 and 17 talk about community engagement and being empowered. And there's mention of the fact that the biosecurity advisory groups are open to the public. And so I'm just wondering, do you know how many people come to those meetings? And also, is there an opportunity for those members of the public or members of the public to bring something to the committee to say, hey, I've got this issue with this type of, I think this is a potential issue that's arising in our area and so on? Is it a mechanism to actually empower in there?
To the second part, I'm not actually sure if there's an open floor time. Perhaps that's a good question for one of the councillors who sits on our groups, and maybe they can jump in to help me answer that part of the question in a minute. In relation to the first part, it's probably not a very fair year to judge how successful community attendance at those meetings has been, given the restrictions that have come because of COVID. The need to host more meetings online has definitely made making an inviting environment for people to attend all the more challenging. I don't think many have come to the meetings that have been in public, but the meetings are shifting back into in-person modes now. And as those groups sort of go through their refresh, which will start with the new council as they come on board and kick off their meetings again, that public attendance is something that we can take a look at. I guess also as part of that refresh, keen to look at where those groups have been successful and evaluate whether the terms of reference continue to be appropriate, and is there an opportunity for us to get better value for staff or for the attendees of those advisory groups as part of that process. But that will be coming in some decisions for the incoming council.
Yeah,
That
thanks,
sounds good.
Councillor Southworth. Just to follow up on that, it is there's a public forum at every meeting, so it's like a 30-minute time. In saying that, we have never, I don't think for the Christchurch Banks Peninsula group, we haven't had more than probably 2 members of the public at any one meeting. I'm not sure if it's different for any other.
The same.
So it is there, but we're absolutely aware that the community focus is the focus for the next term. Although in saying that, we know that COVID is like an ongoing thing, but we're trying to work with that because it's almost like, instead of just saying, oh, it's COVID, we need to find ways to get around that, because unless we're really in step with the community, we're not going to be going far at all.
Thank you. Councillor Mackenzie, Liz?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that, we had a couple of people coming along to our public forum, part of our biodiversity, biosecurity advisory group. But yeah, there needs to be some more thought given to how that is structured into the group through the terms of reference and everything, because it wasn't sort of, widely advertised, and I think people turning up there weren't totally clear on what the group could achieve for them, members of the public turning up. So that some thought will be need to give into that.
Thank you very much. So I think, Alex, we've probably exhausted the questions of clarity. So thank you for talking to the report, and I guess you can leave the table now. Thank you. Then we'll put the motion that we've got here, that the Natural Environment Committee notes the progress made in the Biodiversity Biosecurity portfolio in year 1 of the long-term plan, 2021-2031. We'll have a mover and a seconder, Councillor Farm, Councillor Mackenzie. Is there any further discussion or any discussion, Councillor Edge, and then Councillor Farm?
Just quickly on page 91, item 33, just want to let the public know that Environment Canterbury and Ōtūwharekai have agreed the draft strategy is ready for community engagement for the Ashley Rakahuri, and further work will then follow on from that. So hopefully by the end of the year, some further discussion with the community might take place. I think people in the district are really looking forward to it.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just a few comments around this program of work. And the first is just a general update around the biodiversity champions. And it might not have happened by the time this paper was submitted, but at our last meeting, there was agreement that there would be a staff forum established, because in the paper it kind of notes that staff have been observers. But just with that staff level hui, it's really like there's so much enthusiasm and so much excitement, I think, about how we can be working better together in this space, not just at the governance level, but also at the organisational level. And I think for a lot of the staff members who are either like a, could be a 0.5 FTE or even less, they're finding a lot of positivity and excitement and being able to learn and share with each other, which is really cool. The other comment that I just had was about sort of just some of the language that I think we just have to be really, I guess, aware of when we're kind of talking about this biodiversity stuff. And I think particularly I'm picking on the Braided River Revival part of this paper, and it's number 28, and it says that the program is creating landscape scale alignment for all these reasons, and that Papatapurunanga landowners, communities, etc., are involved at all levels to achieve the outcomes. And I think that's all very well and good to be like an aim, that's where we want to be, but I would hate for people to think that we think that's where we are right now at the very start of these strategies, and with the delays that have happened and that kind of thing. And I say that particularly because at our last biosecurity meeting the other day, we were looking at Te Ara Ki Mua, which is the Department of Conservation's sort of adaptive framework for the control of feral ungulates, which we've heard a lot about from the community around this table across the region. And it's literally like this 2-page thing, which doesn't really say a lot. And it says that that's giving effect to the Aotearoa biodiversity strategy and that kind of thing. And it's just simply not. And so I just want us to be really like critical on ourselves about our language and how we talk about these things. And then finally, just broadly saying how important this work is, and really just thanking staff for all the work that is going on behind the scenes. We know we have our challenges in getting this structure right about how we actually have time to talk about and delve into this really important work, and we're not there yet. But yeah, just a huge thank you to staff in this area, and glad that the work's continuing, even if we don't have the best visibility over it, and hopefully we will in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. If there are no further points for discussion, we have got a motion up here that's been moved by Councillor Farm, seconded by Councillor Mackenzie, that we note the progress made in this biodiversity and biosecurity portfolio in year 1, the long-term plan 2021-2031. All those in favour say aye. Against? Carried. Thank you very much. Right, we will then now move on to agenda item 8.4, page 93 of your agenda. So that's the update on Ōtūwharekai. We've got Judith. I'll ask Judith Goulet, our General Manager of Regulatory Services, to come and introduce this report. And the floor is yours, Judith.
Tēnā koutou katoa. It's my privilege to provide the Natural Environment Committee with this update from the Ōtūwharekai Working Group today. This is the group that's working collectively to halt and reverse the degradation of Ōtūwharekai. The working group was initiated in 2019 when agencies with statutory responsibilities connected in response to the concern and dismay expressed by Arawhenua Runanga at his own committee meeting around the decline of the Morori of Ōtūwharekai. More recently, the landowners have joined the working group once the clues report that came in indicated the contribution of farming practices to nutrient loading and the action that would be needed by the farming community, as well as the inclusion of Ministry for the Environment and Ministry for Primary Industries. I'll take the item as read, but I have a couple of updates from the table that was included as item 17 in the paper. So since that was published as part of the Zone Committee update last month, the Ashburton District Council councillors have adopted their Future of Lake Camp and Lake Clearwater 30-year plan that was at their council meeting last Tuesday on August the 17th. So that was adopted. Department of Conservation and Forest and Bird did a joint bird survey. It was actually earlier in the year, but it was missed off being captured under that joint work program. And on Monday, there was an additional progress on the meeting around inappropriate use of four-wheel driving occurring in the catchment, which involved Ashburton District Council, Environment Canterbury and DOC, the Aquatic Club, with the hut holders deciding not wanting to be involved, given that within that community there is very disparate views on four-wheel drive use, so they'll just stay out of it. But I just thought I'd just make mention of those sort of three updates on progress. In addition to, now that the council, Ashburton District Council councillors have adopted this plan, they are looking at what might need to go into their district plan review to give effect to some components of that. So that's available online if anyone's interested in seeing that. And the working group informed a lot of the content in there, and the agencies gave input as well. So those are the main points I just wanted to cover for the paper.
Okay, do we have any points of clarity while Judith's at the table around this paper? No. Sorry, Vicky's.
Yeah, sorry.
Got a hand up, Vicky?
So under paragraph 14 in the risk assessment legal compliance, talks about the extensive work underway exploring non-regulatory methods to achieve outcomes. I'm just wondering about the next steps in terms of regulatory in a broader sense for the high country lakes in terms of the work in this project going forward into the plans, the integrated plan that will be notified in 2024. So how is this going to feed in, or is it being taken on board?
Yes, no, thank you. So all the work that's been done under today has been looking at informing future planning frameworks and requirements or statutory frameworks, not just for Environment Canterbury, but like I just mentioned with the district plan review as an example for other agencies as well. It was also an aspect that fed into a lot with the recent review for Linds's Pastoral Lease Act that just got reviewed, given it now has a greater focus of compliance with the permits that they issue. But definitely informing our plan. We're working quite closely with our planning team around what we're learning could be incorporated with any future plan, but recognising that some of the immediate non-statute things that aren't in a plan that we're doing right now is changing the trend, well, is changing the action today versus setting that direction in the future. And that, as mentioned, work with the MFE is also there to look at what they can put into informing future national regulation as well.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any further points of clarification before we put the motion on the table and go to discussion? If there isn't, we've got a motion here that the Natural Environment Committee receives the update from the Ōtūwharekai Working Group. We have a mover and a seconder. Yeah, she's wanting a discussion point. Go ahead, Grant. Seconder for that one, please. Are you wanting to be seconder, Liz?
Yes, I'm happy to second, but I do have discussion point.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. So we've got Councillor Elizabeth McKenzie, a seconder there. Okay, we'll now move on to some discussion around this. We've got Liz that would like to make a point. So Liz, you go.
Yeah, hi. I mean, yeah, we've come a long way on this, and we have done some really good work. And I think everything that we've heard so far, it shows very clearly that anything we do, it tends to be quite slow. And we can't really take urgent action on this situation with Ōtūwharekai due to the lack of legislative tools that we have available to us. And, you know, everyone has been working really hard to try and do whatever we possibly can. So I guess what I'd like to say really is just that I'd like to continue to challenge our staff to find any and every way that they can think of that we can take action to slow down or stop the continuing pollution of these lakes. Yeah, that's pretty much all I'd like to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Scott. And then Councillor Farm. Sorry, Councillor Farm.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, still just hugely concerning, but absolutely noting the really good work that's happening. I wonder, and sorry, this is just like I wonder in terms of the comms around this, particularly when it comes to the fantastic work which is happening on farm in terms of changing practices and not winter grazing certain areas and that kind of thing. I almost wonder if there are areas where the landowners would be comfortable making statements like, or that we share information that is things like, you know, there's no longer any winter grazing in the catchments where it's deemed to be potentially impacting the lake, or there is no, you know, top dressing of areas that is deemed to be impacting the lake, you know, just sort of general statements like that, which may well be happening, but it actually gives visibility to the work that the landowners, to the actions that the landowners are taking, and it's easy for us to communicate that kind of action if that's happening, because we want to support that and tell people about it. And the other comment that I just have was around our risk assessment and legal compliance with this whole area of Ōtūwharekai. And I think it's really great that we're, you know, recognising that our current provisions in our land and water regional plan aren't strong enough and that kind of thing. And I think it's really good that we're recognising the risk that exists to the rural community in terms of financial and even emotional consequences. But equally, I think we should be stating the basics about the risk of these areas being destroyed and the immense cultural significance and the iconic and outstanding values which lie in these areas will essentially be lost forever. And I wish it wasn't that dramatic, but we're told that in terms of the water quality and how it works, it is that dramatic. So maybe we should be stating upfront that those are the risks as well. Thank you.
Thanks. I think I might just pop in here as a chair, take the opportunity as well. Look, I actually think Councillor Farm's onto something quite important around the comms that maybe staff could hear and give some thought to, because you do need that positive feedback loop to carry on getting good work and keep people engaged and stuff if we're wanting to build relationships and get the outcomes that we want. So I think that's really quite a valid point, and I agree that that's something that the working group or even ECan itself could perhaps take a little bit of a lead on, even if it's through Shane Gilmore or something like that. I think that's really important. I also just do think that we need to have a little bit of a reality lens as well over the whole context and acknowledging it's an outstanding landscape, etc. But those families that actually live and work up there, they actually appreciate and see it in exactly the same vein. And we do know that they are fully compliant with the rules and regulations, but as Councillor Farms pointed out, it appears that there is some deficiencies around how to meet some of the outcomes within our own policies. So I think it's a really valid point. So then I can see Councillor Mackenzie's wanting to have a go next.
Just on that same issue, and I think Lana's, look, I know the four landowners up there reasonably well, and I think that they would certainly appreciate the ability to get some credit for the work that they've done. And perhaps, given the comments Tim made earlier in the workshop about timeframes, perhaps in part of that PR would be suggesting that you don't expect to see immediate water quality improvements, but that hopefully they'll be following the actions of the farmers in the not too distant future, something along those lines.
Okay.
If you'd like me to talk to the landowners about that, I'm more than happy to be involved in that process.
I think probably verbal wouldn't hurt, but I think we also need to have something a bit through the official channels. So we have Councillor Edge, then we're Pauling and Timatanga Cranwell.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I just want to acknowledge that having a team of local and Crown agencies all getting together to try to find some solutions, do some research, and then hopefully we'll get a report reasonably soon on the learnings that they find, and also an action plan to try to save these lakes before it's too late. And I do note that there are some regular updates being provided on the Environment Canterbury website under Ōtūwharekai, Ashburton Lakes. So hopefully that will keep on going. And it looks like under the communications heading there that a broader engagement plan is being developed. And the zone committee's also involved in that. So that's really good to see. But yeah, the pressure's on, and we need to keep at it.
Councillor Pauling.
Kia ora tātou. Yeah, I'd really support what Lan has said, and others have supported that as well. Because, and I think the risk assessment section, especially point 13, say something really important. to our community, and that's that you know, our land and water regional plan wasn't strong enough in this area, and I think that's important for us to acknowledge that you know, it's not the landowners up there that are at fault because they've followed a plan that we created and they're compliant as we know. So we're not putting blame there, but we do have to own this. Environment Canterbury has to own this because it was our plan that we know we didn't quite get there on it. And to me, what Lana said about highlighting some of the things that we're doing on farm is the only thing we can do right now, because we know from our staff that the planning framework will take so long to catch up. But that's the job we have in front of us, and I think that's the last point that I would say. It's frustrating because we've been involved in this during this term to try to do something about it, and that work on farm that the staff are leading with the landowners is really critical. And I think it would be great to share some of those things that we are doing so people understand the links that are being taken. But what it highlights is the important role this council has to come with the review and hopefully improvement of our land and water plans going forward. That's really where it's at, people. And, you know, I hope that we take that with willing arms to, you know, take on that challenge as well as work with our Runanga, like we know we are doing at the moment, to try to start that process. Because we have to get it right this time. So I think it's important that we have acknowledged it in this paper, but we do need to tell the community that it was us that maybe didn't quite get that right. But we are doing these things to all we can do at the moment before we get those plans, the chance to improve those plans going forward. So thank you.
Councillor Cromwell and then Councillor Scott.
Okay, if I just carrying further, Councillor Farm, when she started talking about, you know, I mean, it is serious, especially with Lake Heron, I suppose, Ōtūwharekai. You know, how far is it, you know, has it flipped, or is it going to flip completely, or can we, if it does, can we get it back? But I mean, Councillor Mackenzie talked about that Elizabeth, when she asked a question to Claire Cunningham and MFE about the cost, you know, the cost of maybe not being fast enough. And then for me, it's probably more kind of, Lan talked about culturally significant area, the cost of, you know, loss of Mihi and that connection of whakapapa to that area, because the reason why you do have that connection up there is through Mihi. So, I mean, it's not going to be an answer for this. This is probably more of a statement as well, which is fine on from Elizabeth, is just, you know, how do we estimate the cost if you know, if we do lose it, because it's such a significant place up there for Arawhenua, to Ururi and also Taumotu. So just a comment really. And there is no, if you know, the question from Claire's response to Elizabeth, is, and you know, through section 32s, etc. It's hard to get a cost, you know, on that. It's, you know, to find that, but you know, there's always you know, that question of what is it? Got it.
Mr. Scott?
I wasn't going to say anything here because I think we're all pretty much on the same page, but just in reply, I guess, to Councillor Pauling, the fact that we have owned up really early in this process to say this is a hole that nobody saw, or maybe people did see. And in hindsight, a lot of people have seen the fact that the land and water plan didn't cover this. And we have said that in this room. We have said that with multi-agencies. We have admitted the fact is that, you know, when the plans got put in place in 2012, there were bits missing. And then there was a big rush to do sub-regionals and plan change 5 and a whole lot of other things. And these bits are missing. It was Councillor Pauling himself who said very, very early on the piece in response to the challenge from Ngāi Tahuruhiri and Arawhenua. Maybe we should make this a case study. And that's how I see this. I see this as a case study. It's a bespoke piece of work that we're doing in that area that we can step off in other areas. But I think, in my point, and I'd support Councillor Farm, what she's saying, she's been consistent all the way through in the two terms of that we're not going hard enough, fast enough, or reactionary enough around the stuff. But we have, this is a process. Carl Russell from Arawhenua made the point in this room here when we were talking about how do we move forward, and I'm not sure others were here, were saying this isn't a reverse colonial situation. We need to understand what's happening. We need to learn from it, and then we need to make sure that we take those steps. Councillor Ian McKenzie and myself, when we did go up to meet with those farmers prior to this really kicking in, Councillor McKenzie was quite forthright to those farmers with his explanation that things have got to change here. It's not fit for purpose. You can't hold up your A-grade audit anymore to say that this is the right thing to do here. So I think let's be fair here. I think this is a good piece of work, and I support all those sentiments around that, because we need to get to the bottom of it. And I know there's confusion about what we can and can't do. Am I truly satisfied with what's going on here? Probably not. Maybe we should have been here 6 months earlier. But I think we're here. We're doing it, and we're going to get some good outcomes. So thank you, Chair.
Councillor McKenzie.
Just a comment, if I may, Madam Chair. There seems to be a lot of emphasis on the farmers, our land and water plan, which relates to farming activities. But I just remind the council that when you look at Lake Clearwater, which is one of the most significantly affected water bodies up there, that it's been in conservation land now for 15 years, and during that time it is still continuing to deteriorate. So the solutions aren't just focusing on our land and water plan and the farmers up there. There are other complicating issues, and it may be legacy issues, but whatever. We've got to think about the individual water bodies themselves and the bespoke, as Councillor Scott has pointed out, the bespoke solutions for each water body, because they've got different issues.
Thank you, Councillor McKenzie. I think everybody's had a fairly good go at that. So we have a motion on the table here. It's been moved by Councillor Edge, seconded by Councillor McKenzie, and that we receive the update from the Ōtūwharekai working group. All those in favour say aye. Against? Carried. Thank you very much. Right, we're just coming up to 2 hours. We've got 10 more minutes to go. We'll do 8.5 and then we'll have our 10-minute compulsory break and stretch the legs. So we're on to agenda item 8.5, page 102 of your agenda. This is the paper around the July 2022 rainfall and flow information. I will then hand it over to Dr. Tim Davey, our Director of Science, to introduce this report.
Kia ora, Chair. I won't spend long on this, but first just acknowledge Helen Shaw and Carl Hansen, the authors of the paper, who couldn't be here today, and I'll just briefly introduce it. We've talked a little bit about floods today in another context, but it's just sort of brought to mind that there are different ways of measuring floods, and there are different ways of thinking about floods. And one is around the damage caused, and the other is kind of the statistical approach of how big were the flows or how much rainfall was there. This report is about the latter. It's kind of magnitude of flows and the rainfall and what the groundwater response was. And that's not to belittle the damage done. There was significant damage done. It's just we don't necessarily have that information to be able to bring here. And we just wanted to bring something to show the magnitude of these floods in terms of the hydrological response. There are 4 things that I just point out in the paper. The first is figure 1, which is showing the rainfall at 4 different sites, and it has deliberately all been put on the same scale. And you can see there, if you look at it, the difference around the region, particularly 1C, Mount Hutt, where you can see the intensity of the rainfall is much more than in other places. And the interesting thing about that, when you look at the river response, is that it was a very marked river response in the Ashburton, but it was nowhere near as big as the one that we'd had the previous June. So it makes it look like it wasn't a big flood event. It actually was a really big flood event in the Ashburton. It was just not as big as we've seen recently. So you can see the rainfall intensities there. You can see the amount of rainfall, and there is reference in the paper to the fact that for Christchurch, it's the highest July rainfall on record by a considerable margin. And then we've highlighted some river sites where there has been exceptional flow recorded. There are a couple of things to point out. One is at the bottom of page 105 on the Huratini, Hallsville River. And the interesting thing I think about that is you can really see that the floods get bigger through the month, even though the rainfall stays much the same for each of those events. And that's just the catchment getting wetter and wetter and wetter. And that's what we've seen, so we ended up with a flow in the Huratini that was actually very close to the highest recorded and the highest recorded was the really big flood in 2013, I think. The Amarama stream on the next page, it was by far the largest, and we talked about the impact of that on Amarama, particularly the motor camp. So the recorded flow there was really way bigger than anything we'd seen before in the I think around 40 years of record. And one of the reasons for that was actually to do with the snowfall that was sitting there, and we had warm northwest rain that came in, really intense rain, but it was on snow and it melted it very quickly, and we got that rapid response. And then the last thing just to point out is that the groundwater response you can see in various graphs there, and it's not unusual, but it's certainly marked. You can see here that even at quite deep groundwater, so some of those plots, 138 meters, 100 meter groundwater has responded to this rainfall. So, it really did have a large impact, not just on the flows themselves. And I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you. I can certainly vouch, and probably some other farmers here too, that it only takes 10 mils to make the river run now and almost come up to my hata. Questions of clarity? Any questions of clarity for Councillor Edge and then Councillor Farm?
Just a couple of queries. On page 104, item 3, there's a reference there that the flows in the Heathcote River were notably lower than they would have been if the upper catchment storage hadn't been in place. Do we have any data on what that might mean, or are you anticipating, I suppose, trying to assess in the future what that might be in a climate changing world? Because it's potentially important for the future in constructed wetlands for similar rivers elsewhere. So that would be good to know what that is.
Through you, Chair, we don't have data at hand to be able to do that. That would be a modelling exercise. But there are records. I know the City Council do on the levels in those attenuation ponds. Of course, a lot of that storage is there as a mitigation from the housing that's in the catchment. So it's a kind of a replacement of what would naturally be slowing things down as well. But so we don't have anything that we can readily put to hand, but it is an interesting exercise, and it's certainly part of the design factor around the size of those ponds is around thinking about climate change and what impact it would have on flooding into the future.
My second question is on page 110 under next steps. Talks about the statistics and things like that. I just wanted to inquire, are we sharing data with NIWA and the TAs? I was at an event in Waimakariri where the staff there were explaining, the size of the storm in comparison with various parts of the district. So do we do that? Do we actually get their data or exchange data?
Yes, we do. It's a regular thing. I mean, I'd have to say sometimes in the heat of the moment during a flood, we see sort of things come out from NIWA, or then we're not, and it doesn't quite line up with what we're thinking. But certainly within a certain amount of time, we do share the data, and we use each other's sites and recorders to update the information. So.
Yeah, thank you for this update. And yeah, really alarming stuff in terms of our new normal and of course the impacts that these events have on communities. My question is just around, are you aware, Tim, if we have like, and it's likely not Environment Canterbury, likely NIWA or something, but we know that there's increasing unpredictability. Do we have a broad gauge or an idea of what that increasing unpredictability actually looks like, and whether what we're seeing is worse than that, or, you know, because I mean, I guess the kind of message that we get or comes across is that it seems that these global events are generally kind of more frequent than would be expected perhaps at this point in our projected climate increases. But is that just a sort of media headlines thing, or is that really what we are seeing?
Through you, Chair, I know it's an active area of research, particularly by NIWA, and I haven't seen a detailed response to that yet. It is one of those, you know, as you can imagine, it's a very difficult thing to do, to try and disentangle how much more what we're seeing as a result from climate change. That I have seen some work that NIWA have done with Victoria University, actually, where they've been able to say this event was probably X amount more because of climate change. And so, but the actual kind of incidence of this happening, which is again is something that is talked about with climate change, I haven't seen an analysis yet that has really followed that through to say, yeah, it is a lot more than we thought or a lot less. But I do know it's an area of active research.
Okay, we'll go to Councillor Southworth and answer your question. We do have to take a break at 2, so we'll take the 10. Sorry, at 3. I'm sure I got 2 in my ear.
2 hours.
Yeah, we've been here 2 hours. And then we'll come back and take the rest of the questions online, and we've got one more at least one more in the room. So, yeah, Vicky, we'll take yours now, and then we'll adjourn for 10 minutes.
Thank you, Claire. Yeah, Tim, do you know, we know that rainfall is increasing in intensity and the flows are becoming larger more frequently. Is there a methodology now that incorporates that into flood scheme designs? Are we already accounting for that in our design, or are we still working to the traditional, or the, looking back over the past, the annual return intervals and the expected flows?
The simple way of answering that is that when we get these large events and we reanalyze our statistics, what happens almost inevitably is that the 1 in 50 year drops to a 1 in 30 or something like that because of the size of them. And then if you think of that the other way around and you go, well, we built our stop banks for a 1 in 1,000 year, now it's only built for a 1 in 900, or I'm making these figures up, but and therefore we would have to raise it. So if we are maintaining our level of service around what they are protecting for, then we can work out, and we do, and it's part of our active work program to look at taking through the statistics and sort of putting it back the other way and modelling it and saying, okay, in order to maintain that level of protection, given the flow statistics as they are now, which is a reflection of the more recent events, then we would expect to see that design change. So it's an ongoing program that we're working on.
So to maybe reframe that, essentially we have an ongoing reduction in our level of service unless we do something differently. And that is presumably what's been incorporated into that 30-year infrastructure strategy, where we've got those additional costs going forward into the future for, I think, beefing up some of those schemes. But this is where we would be taking that into account in the rethinking, is actually that the best strategy to keep topping up these embankments and keep paying more, and the the risk that comes with having a failure when you have a really, really big embankment. So that's, that which will get woven into that 200-year strategy or the next 30-year infrastructure strategy. Is that right? Or is that essentially getting the gist of things?
Yes, that is correct, and that's a better way of phrasing it, because it doesn't just mean you automatically make things larger, that you do have to think through what the implications of that are and the overall value that you're working to. So yes, it is. You're correct.
And we have that that is what our pieces of work are doing. That's what we've got planned now. Cool. Thanks.
Okay, folks, standing orders dictate that we have to have a 10-minute adjournment. So we will be back online at 3:10. Okay, thanks very much. We'll recommence after that short adjournment. And our next question comes from Councillor Clearwater.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks, Tim, for your report. I'm clearly, as you've indicated too, that the focuses are specifically on the July rainfall, and you've made a note too. There's a note too that it's not a flood report, but that was some information in the Catchment subcommittee's report earlier in the month, but that didn't include the aspect of urban rivers, and there is reference here, of course, clearly to the record rainfall in Christchurch City. I just wondered, though, Tim, as an extension of, an impact of this report too, when it comes to Christchurch's urban rivers, for example, the Ōpāwaho and the Ōtākaro, clearly there were a lot of significant wastewater overflows. So I'm just wondering about when, in fact, as a council, since that, my understanding is that's a joint responsibility for our council. I'm just wondering, is there a way that, is that part, the water quality in urban rivers, is that part of, in terms of next steps, the understanding the program in the water and land portfolio? Is that part of that, and could that be reported on in the future?
Sorry, I was just pausing to think for a second there, Phil. That was Councillor Clearwater. The Christchurch City reporting on the water quality in their rivers as part, and they reported it to us as part of their global consent for stormwater. So, and that includes information around the number of times there are sewage overflows and the monitoring of water quality that has been done. So it's not an active work program for us apart from to receive and see whether it's meeting consent conditions. And so we as an Environment Canterbury are not actively looking at it in terms of monitoring it ourselves, but we do get that information, and it is the sort of information that we could bring through, when we receive it. Not sure if that's.
So it just seems to me, Tim, look, clearly this report is focused on one particular area, but just as councillors who've got some responsibility for our urban areas of the city, it just seems to me that the whole water quality aspect, besides being a regulatory function, will be helpful for us to have that further information that you've referred to.
Yeah, I take that on board. Thank you for that feedback.
Thank you, Tim.
Councillor Mackenzie.
Is that me, Claire?
Yes, sorry, Liz, it's you. Yeah.
Thanks. Before I make my comment in question, I just want to support Councillor Clearwater's suggestion of stormwater strategy for all urban areas throughout Canterbury, actually, because we would save a lot of money on spending on flood protection down in these coastal urban areas if we actually did a bit more partnering with some of the district and city councils to actually beef up a stormwater retention strategy for households, etc. But my comment and question is around actually water in the higher areas, the high country areas of the catchments and the impact on flooding. So in the plains and coastal areas, if the water's draining too quickly from the high country into the plains and coastal areas, then we're going to get higher amounts of water coming down quickly. If we could slow that down in the high country area, and we already are to a certain extent, there are a lot of farmers that already have various small structures, weirs, dams, etc., to slow water down. If we can slow that down further, then we're going to save money downstream with having put in bigger stop banks. So given that these events are going to be more intense and more frequent, and as Councillor Southworth has mentioned, could prevent us from achieving our levels of service around flood protection, then perhaps having like a slow water strategy similar to the Scottish Environmental Protection Agency would be a high priority for us. It's not that expensive to simply let property owners know that perhaps they should rethink removing some of those logs from their swales and streams, or maybe they want to put them in if they're in areas that are not affecting something critical. And if they're in areas where they may want to have them there because they may want to, plant more trees or something. Perhaps, this would be for a future council, but having something like a slow water strategy could be very important for actually saving us money downstream in the long term. Thank you.
Councillor Pauling.
Got it. Hey, thanks for this, Tim. I think it's really good to, and Helen and others that put this together. It's really important to put this down and show people just how dramatic it has been. Actually, you look at that table 1, it's quite amazing to look at that. And so I just wanted to check a few things because I'm making some assumptions in my head. So is July normally our wettest month in Canada? Or is there other months that are wetter? Sorry, maybe you don't have the...
I don't have it on top of my head, but I do know that New Zealand in general is actually relatively uniform. It's not, like a lot of places with very, very seasonal. The July and August months are when we get our floods, which is more to do with less evaporation and the wetter soil. And then of course it does vary, but where you are in Canterbury is the other side. But so it's not. I do know that it's. I couldn't say if it was the wettest month, but there's not a lot of difference between our months. We actually get quite uniform rainfall throughout. Interesting to know, and maybe there's something we can follow up on is, how does it relate to June and August, for example, which, those wetter times, and even September. And then, what years, so particularly maybe that, because it's easier maybe for the Christchurch data that we've got there about that being the biggest one since 1978. And what years were the top 10, for example, would be really interesting, just for that sort of frequency of how this is happening. Is it the last 10 years have been the top 5 on record? Just be interesting to see. So I'm just interested in sort of that what's been going on around those dates. Is it the wettest, so that people know that it's normally is the wettest anyway, but this one's been a real wet July, or is it some other months that we get? And I suppose then you can start to understand, well, what is the impact of that wet July, and if we get a wet September that's similar rainfall, does it have the same impact, for example, on our flood, flood control and all that. So anyway, really, really awesome data, and just interested in some more maybe, but maybe I can follow up with Helen or something here. Thank you.
There's no further questions. Oh, sorry. Yes, Councillor Mackenzie, question of clarity. Okay. Okay, thank you. So how about we put this motion on the table then, and then we can move to discussion. So the motion is that the Natural Environment Committee notes the information in this report. Do I have a mover and a seconder? Councillor Marshall and Councillor Sackle. We've got a mover and a seconder. So now we'll move into discussion, and we've got Councillor Ian McKenzie and then Councillor Scott.
Look, you may find this really, really boring, but we've been keeping detailed rainfall records since the early 60s. And every time I update those on an annual basis, I work out the average rainfall. So Tim is absolutely right. Canterbury's average rainfall is pretty much the same for every month. And the only variations are 30 days with 31 months tend to have a little bit more rainfall than days with 30 months. But in fact, I think our worst rainfall event was in February. So there's no guarantee that the rainfall event will necessarily come in the winter. What I think you need to, the mid 70s were very similar weather patterns to what we're having now. So this isn't unusual weather. What is unusual, I think, is that it's warmer. So in the 70s, when we had huge rainfall precipitation events in the high country, it was all snow and it stayed as snow. This time we've had big snows and then we've had horrendous rain on top of that snow, and that's doubling the effect on the flood events, because normally you'd get a bit of the snowpack will go through into the spring, and then you'll get rainfall events or melting, which happens slightly more gradually, though you see the Karakia flowing bank to bank. So I think the climate change effect here is maybe a little bit more intensity in the rain, but the biggest effect is the temperature difference. And in terms of slowing the water down in the high country, the Ōtūwharekai Dam is the perfect example of how to slow water down from in the catchments in the high country. Great infrastructure. It actually saved, I think on count so far this winter, it saved Pleasant Point twice, if not 3 times, from significant flooding, because they've been able to release water in anticipation of rainfall and then collect the storm event to allow the Ōpūwharekai, whose poor system, adjust to the extra flows.
Okay, Councillor Scott.
So when I did a paper in meteorology back in 1982, there was some stuff that was pretty evident, and one of those things that's been pretty evident since then and even now is the effect of the Southern Oscillation Index, which at the moment is neutral, and it's predicted to go to La Nina, 70% chance of it going to La Nina, and we'll be able to clarify that by late October. It would have settled to where it's at, and that probably has about a 25% influence on the weather that we have. Now, if it's a really strong La Nina, we get northeasterlies and dry South Island. However, having said that, the NIWA information that we've been given since I became a councillor anyway is the fact that, you know, with the warmer temperatures of the sea, there's more water up there to come down. So it's going to come down. Where's it going to come down? It's in New Zealand, it's going to come down in the winter probably. And then depending on those weather patterns that are, you know, the global weather system is driven by the Southern Oscillation Index. You know, all rain, wind direction and temperature are driven by those things. So they have a big influence. So this wee period we're in now, which is negative, this time next year, if it's really strong La Nina, we could see something completely different. But the rain events themselves are likely to be just as strong. There you go.
Thank you very much for that bit of information there, Councillor Scott. If there is no further discussion, we have a motion on the table. I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you very much. Right, we'll now move on to agenda item 8.6. Now, this is the summary of the council workshop on wallaby management. Did I see Zoe? Yeah. You've disappeared. Zoe, our senior strategy advisor, is going to introduce this report. So Zoe, away you go.
Thank you. Sorry, I have been coming and going a bit. Good afternoon, everyone. Councillors, ngā tīmatanga. This will just be a very brief introduction. I'll take the content of this really as read, but just to remind you really, this report is a summary of a council workshop that was held in early June, exploring future options for wallaby management. And that workshop followed on from a resolution that the Natural Environment Committee made back in February, that a workshop would be held as soon as possible to explore the best funding and management options for wallaby eradication, including consideration of the highly successful wallaby board model. So this report provides a summary of the discussions that were held at that workshop and the feedback that was provided by councillors. And that feedback will be used by staff to guide further development of options. This report also asks you just to note that this will be an ongoing topic of conversation, and that conversation will be continued with the incoming council after the local government elections. So I think I'll just leave it there, but happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Okay, does anybody have any questions of clarity for Zoe? I think most people actually did attend that workshop, so no questions for clarity for Zoe? Nothing coming up, so very well written and presented. Thank you, Zoe. Thank you very much. So we have a recommendation in the paper. We'll just, sorry, Liz, is yours a question of clarity?
Oh, no, I'd just like to second the motion.
Okay.
When you get there.
Thank you. Right here, we're going, Liz has offered to second it. Do we have a mover for the motion? Councillor Farm. Councillor Farm's going to move it. Councillor Liz McKenzie seconding it. Thank you. We have any discussion around the recommendations that we've got here? Councillor Farm?
Yeah, thanks so much for the paper. And personally, I missed the workshop, so I found the paper really informative, and especially with a lot of the concerns that we've been hearing around the council table and questions that, you know, I wanted some clarity about as well. So it sounds like they've been well kind of covered here, and it was really helpful seeing the different models of like what the solutions could be, and noting that this will be an ongoing discussion because it's a really challenging issue. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Farm. Councillor McKenzie, Liz?
Yeah, I just wanted to say really good to see this coming back and seeing work done on it. It's good to see it's going to go to the next council. Just to say, don't drag it out too long. Wallaby is still breeding. You're doing a good job around the edge of the containment area. I live in the containment area, and the wallaby are still there's a lot of them, and there's more. So yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing this happen. Thank you.
If there's no further questions, and there does not appear to be, we have a motion on the table there being moved by Councillor Farm and seconded by Councillor McKenzie. I will put that to the vote. It's quite a long one. I don't know that I need to read it. Can everybody see that? Maybe I should read it because of the online people. That the Natural Environment Committee notes that the council workshop was held on the 9th of June 2022 to explore the best funding and management options for wallaby eradication, including consideration of the highly successful wallaby board model, as resolved by the Natural Environment Committee at its meeting on the 23rd of February. And number 2, notes that the conversation about the future options for wallaby management will be continued with the incoming council beyond the 2022 local government elections. So we'll put it to the vote. All those in favour say aye. Against? So that is carried. Thank you. Now we'll move on to 8.7. So this is a report back on government's submissions. So all councillors were circulated those submissions before they were forwarded. And it looks like Cam Smith, our Senior Strategy Manager, is going to come to table to present this report.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon. So yes, the purpose of this report is to put on the public record 3 submissions that were made by this council over July. Those submissions being on the Water Services Entities Bill to the Finance and Expenditure Select Committee, and a submission on the exposure draft, the National Policy Statement for Indigenous Biodiversity, and also a submission on the exposure draft of proposed changes to the National Policy Statement for Freshwater Management and the National Environment Standard for Freshwater regarding provisions associated with wetlands. I'll take the paper and the submissions as read, but I'll just quickly highlight the process that was followed. And so staff worked with members of this committee to draft the submission, seeking feedback. Then we worked with the Natural Environment Committee co-chairs to finalise the submissions, and then final submissions were signed out by Chair Huey, and submissions are now on the Environment Canterbury website. Thank you.
Are there any questions of clarification of Cam? I think the papers were pretty well worked through at the time they were done. So if there isn't, thank you very much, Cam, for that. We have some recommendations here that the Natural Environment Committee receives Environment Canterbury submissions on the 1.1 Water Services Entity Bill, 1.2 being the exposure draft of the National Policy Statement for Indigenous Biodiversity, and 1.3 the exposure draft of the proposed changes to the National Policy Statement for Freshwater Management and the National Environment Standards of Freshwater. Do I have a mover and a seconder for those, please? Councillor Scott and Councillor Edge as a seconder. Now that means that if anybody has some discussion that they would like to raise, now is the time. Councillor Farm and then Councillor Edge.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, really just again thanking staff for all of this work. I think what I really appreciate about the themes that go across these submissions is consistency across the reforms and asking for consistency so that these really important changes are actually workable and understandable and actually, yeah, make sense. Also local government's role in all of these reforms and changes that are going on, that we are part of this, we need to be part of this. And I really want to just emphasise in that the effort that staff are going to really spell things out and make sure that they are workable. And then the other theme, of course, is us continually emphasising the likes of Te Mana o Te Wai and Te Mana o Te Tao and our partnership with Mana Whenua and Mana Whenua's rights and responsibilities and involvement in these spaces. So I'm just so thrilled to see that we are consistently flying that flag and trying to be a good partner. So thank you to staff.
Thank you, Councillor Edge.
Yes, I want to thank staff as well. I mean, they're always extremely good submissions, very objective, and some great points are raised. I just really want to comment on the submission on the National Policy Statement Freshwater, page 120, item 18. We previously made an earlier submission, but we're having to remake those same sort of points. And I'm just going to pick on 3 bullet points here. One of them is it mentions that there's areas of misalignment between the National Policy Statement for Freshwater Management and the NES for freshwater and other national directions, such as the National Policy Statement for Indigenous Biodiversity and National Planning Standards. So there's a bit of misalignment, as Councillor Farms also suggested. The other one is the concern relating to the management of rivers, and I suppose the definition of a river and riverbed, and the negative impacts that those sorts of things, if they're not sorted now, they will pose problems for us in terms of our management of our braided rivers, which are not the same as the rivers in the North Island. So it's good to reiterate that, but it is of concern, obviously, to us. And also, importantly too, the disconnection between the policies for freshwater management, which seek to enable urban development, quarries, mines, landfills, clean fills, and urban development in natural wetlands, and regulations in the NES freshwater that seek to enable those activities. That's really concerning, and that the submission remarks on how these things, if they are done right, they can actually add value in an urban environment, but the way that it's written is not clear and needs clarification. So there's some real concerns that the submissions raise, and hopefully the government will listen to that in the final version.
Yeah, I'm presuming that that our submissions addressed. There were some concerns that our submissions addressed. Was the word?
Yeah, they mention them and then they address them and suggest, well, basically suggesting, yeah, the government needs to sort them.
Councillor Scott.
I'm just speaking to submissions per se rather than these ones, and speaking generically, and we had a discussion at regional strategic leadership yesterday, and we hope to be able to bring a list of all the stuff that you've done or we've been part of. And the volume's been just horrendous, as Cameron, who's sitting over there, will know, and others will know. And our turnaround time and our processes around that have been also horrendous. I think that we can learn a wee bit from that. I don't know if we'll ever go through that again, but I think we can learn a wee bit from that, how we actually do that. There has been some suggestions that we need a submissions committee that hold on to these things and can be, Councillor Edge is a great detailed person on these things, as he's just alluded to. But some people need that. Some people need the opportunity to go through a good funnel that they can keep coming back to. So I think for the next council, we need to consider that because it's been quite disjointed, I guess. It's been across all committees, and maybe we need, if we're here, we need to consider how we do that a wee bit more lined up than we have been. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you. There does not look to be any more discussion around this paper, around the summary. Sorry, the paper's gone back. Submissions to the government. So we have a motion on the floor there that's been moved and seconded. So I will put that to the vote. All those people in favour say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you very much for that. Right, we'll now move on to agenda item 8.8, which is the CWMS Action Plan Budget 21-22 Projects Report. And I'll welcome back to the table Murray Griffin, our team leader of the Canterbury Water Management Strategy Facilitation Team. So, Murray, the floor is yours.
Kia ora, Chair, councillors and Timatanga. Back again with, I guess, what amounts to a finale of sorts as a report. We decided just to add a short summary report into this meeting, having concluded the triennial reporting round for the committees based around the action plan projects in particular. So the intention of this report is really just to give you a summary of all of the projects that were supported in the 2021-22 financial year by the zone committees through the action plan budget. So as the report notes, there are 48 projects all up across the region. And I think it's worth also noting paragraph 17, which clarifies that when the first of the triennial report from the central zone was presented to you back in February, those three committees were in the process of, but hadn't actually finalised the projects to support, which was done through March to May. So you hadn't actually received the information that's provided here in terms of the actual projects that were supported. So should we do this reporting cycle again, where we'd obviously look to include that, but I suspect next, or in this current financial year, we're kind of ahead of the game. We now have the action plans in place, and the committees and the team are now kind of familiar with the process we're working through. But that's probably the key point to note, just in terms of additional content you wouldn't have seen in the earlier reports.
Thank you. Mara, if you just stay at the table, I will just ask Councillor Southworth to enlarge on the Selwyn Waihola Water Zone Committee there.
Kia ora, thanks, Claire. Yeah, just to really flag, so in under paragraph 20, there are two projects mentioned that are both carried out by Element Environmental. So there's the Waikirikiri Selwyn River Catchment Group establishment and an Upper Waikirikiri Selwyn River Biodiversity Corridor. And I just wanted to clarify that those are not physical on the ground projects, which the title of them may suggest. They're actually more like scoping projects to investigate what might be prioritized, or how sort of catchment group outcomes might be achieved. And similarly with the biodiversity corridor, sort of where are the opportunities and how might that be prioritized. So they're a consultancy report looking at that, which very much, of course, hopeful will lead into on the ground action subsequently. I don't know if Murray wants to add anything else to that.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Reading the way the money's been spent, there seems to be a reasonably significant shift into funding catchment collectives or something similar by a different name. Is that's a clear trend, and there's a clear comfort with zone committees moving money there to get stuff done through third-party groups, locals and stuff? Could you comment, please?
Yes, I think that's a fair reflection of the way the committees have responded, I guess, to this fund moving from an immediate steps context into one that's got a broader remit within the CWMS. So there's still a very strong biodiversity focus, which I think we would have expected as well, given where committees have come from. But certainly I think that move to supporting catchment collectives is, you can see right across the region. So I think that is a pattern that we're expecting to see in terms of ongoing support for that type of work. And as you say, local communities looking to find their own ways of addressing issues in catchments.
Can I just ask a question on the Selwyn? We have the Ellesmere Sustainable Agriculture, which is very much a catchment group, well engaged with a few $1 million worth of government funding for works in what's the old Ellesmere catchment, basically below the main South Road and to the south of the Selwyn. And we have the new catchment equivalent being set up to the north of the Selwyn River into that Green Park tie tap right through that area, pushing back into Christchurch. So I just wonder what the investigations are when possibly some of the more intense farmed areas of the catchment have two groups either well underway or being put in place. So I just wonder what the investigations are going to find when a significant amount of the catchment has those groups already in play.
Probably Councillor Southworth is maybe able to enlighten us a bit more. And
I wondered if that was so it basically it's recognised that there are some concerns around particularly the nutrients in the Selwyn Waikirikiri River, which are impacted, and also pathogens in parts that can impact on things like swimmability and also algal blooms. And some of that is actually right up high in the catchment, so up around the White Cliffs area and up there. So these aren't areas that currently have large scale projects going on. They're not around. I know there's a concentration of work around the lake edge that's particularly connected in with Tomutu. But this is, these are looking for opportunities to really spread through the catchment, not just in the areas where there's maybe large amounts of money to spend from more intensely farmed areas. These are right up into the hills. Thanks.
Do you have anything to add, Murray, to that question?
Yes, it kind of does. I mean, we do have two parts of the catchment. I'm also well aware of initiatives that are happening in other parts of the catchment. So I'm just a concern that may be fleeting of kind of doubling down on reinvesting to figure stuff out that may be kind of underway. But I'm not saying we are. It's just that nervousness.
That just to clarify, really, that's precisely the sort of information that's being captured. That's exactly what happened, was to go and talk to people on the ground, stakeholders, find out what is happening and get that mapped, so that then there's gaps or opportunities come out through that. Perhaps John will get a hold of the report and forward it to you. That might be the best way to give you the opportunity to have your input, because there may also be things that you know about that haven't been captured yet. So that would be great if you could input.
Thank you, Vicky, for that update. Okay, if there's no, Councillor Ford.
I'll just to add to that, might be good to link in with the work that the Ōtūwharekai governance is doing in the Whakamutunga Kōrero group, because there is some maps that have been produced about who's doing what in the catchment. So that'd be good to link in with that, actually, if that hasn't been done already.
Yeah, I believe we've got Les Wanahala on there as is one of the co-chairs. I think he's connected in with that too. So I believe that has been flagged, but I'll double check as well.
Okay, if there is no further questions of clarity, I'll thank you, Murray, and you may leave the table. We have a recommendation here that the Natural Environment Committee receives this report on the Canterbury Water Management Strategy Zone Committee's action plan budget projects confirmed for 2021-22. Can move it and a seconder for that, please. Councillor Scott, seconder. Councillor Farm. Thank you. Now, does anybody have any discussion that they would like to have around this topic?
I'd just like to make a point, Chair, that I think it's a good report. You can go to your region and you can look where the priorities have been set, and you then can inquire on those projects, and I think it's well done. Thank you.
Definitely concur with that. It's quite nice to see them all together at the end of the paper. Yeah, Councillor Farm.
Just a quick comment, having been part of the Banks Peninsula Zone Committee's decision making about this budget and also the next budget for the next year, and I'm sure it's shared across the committees, this funding is really valuable, and it actually does allow the committees to have that agency, to hear from the community, to actually support them, to have that link between staff and the committees, and in terms of suggesting which projects might have value for a whole bunch of outcomes and that kind of thing. So yeah, I want to emphasise that, because we did limit the increase in funding that we were planning. So just in terms of going forward to next term, really shouting out to this fund and saying, look, that we sort of can't. I don't think there would be too much that we were giving these zone committees in terms of community engagement and actual outcomes on the ground. So please consider that for the future. Thanks.
There doesn't appear to be any further points around the discussion. We have a motion on the floor there, moved by Councillor Scott, seconded by Councillor Farm, that we receive this report. I'll put that to the vote. So all those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you very much for that. Right, we're up to agenda item number 9. Thankfully, it's the next meeting date. It will be in the triennium, next triennium, as this is the last meeting. And then I will now declare this meeting closed, and I will invite Councillor Marshall to close with the Karakia, please.
Kia ora, Councillor Mackay. Inuhia ki te urutapu nui o tāne, kia wātia, kia mama, te nāko, te tinana, te wairua i te ara takata, koiara i rongo, whakairia ake ki runga kia tina, homie, huie, tai kie.